Hi, I'm Michelle from Michelle's Romantic Tangle, and Marla S. asked me if I would do a video showing how I grid my cross-stitch projects. So here we go. If you are not familiar with gridding, what it is basting lines every 10 stitches on your fabric that match the grid lines on the chart. And the reason I do this, I have a lot of distractions in the room when I am stitching. And it helps me tremendously to have the grid lines so I can check what I have stitched with what is on the chart. I know lots of cross stitchers don't grid. For me, it has been a tremendous help, and I wish I'd learned about it sooner. I would have had far fewer abandoned projects. This, in case you're wondering, is all in Calm. It's a Dimensions Gold kit that is already nearly half done, and I wanted to show you grid lines in action. Now I'm going to show you how I start. For my example, I'm going to use Bayside Cottage. It's a Dimensions Gold Collections Petites, and I'm not actually starting this right now. I'm just going to grid the fabric and put in a couple of stitches because this will be an easy one to show you how I do it. They're quick to grid, and I have already lost my thread. I had it here when I sat down. Here we go. I do not grid the way everyone else grids. I grid the way that works for me. So my disclaimer is that lots of people say not to use sewing machine thread. I use it. This, if anyone cares, is Essentials by Connecting Threads, and I buy it because it's inexpensive compared to the smaller spools you get in the craft stores. Of course, if you're only buying it to grid cross-stitch projects, then by all means Coats, whatever the big sewing machine thread brands are that I should be able to name right now, but I can't. Just get a good quality thread, not the super cheap stuff. So first, and I'm going to be showing you the edges of the chart here because there's not another way to do it. I'm not going to show enough that anybody could do anything with. So start with your piece of fabric. I thread my needle with a length of thread that is probably 2 or 3 times the width of the piece of fabric. And then the next thing I'm going to do is fold my fabric in half. So at the halfway point of the fabric, I tie a loose knot, and I make sure to do it over several threads because when the project is done, I will be cutting this knot out. And then I am going to baste to the opposite edge of the fabric. Stitch all the way until very close to the opposite edge of the fabric. This is the line you are basing all of either your horizontal or vertical lines in the project on. So be very careful, check and double check that this is a straight line and that you have not skipped across a line of stitching. The next thing that I'm going to need to do, I suppose in a perfect world I would stitch the other direction, but I have more thread on my needle, so I am going to do more horizontal rows. And in order to determine how many rows that I need, I look at my chart. Like I said, I'm not showing you enough to do any damage with. The center is the line I just stitched. I count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that is how many rows I will need to stitch to the opposite, to the side of that center line that I just made. I count 10 stitches over, I count again, and then I count a third time, because if you mess up your grid lines, you have defeated the whole purpose of putting in the grid lines. Do this while I'm holding the camera, and in the process I'm making it much more complicated than it needs to be. So when I get to the end of the row, I count across 10 stitches, I put my needle in, then I lose what I was doing and I pull it, and so I have a long stitch separating my rows. I count at the beginning, I count in the middle of the row, and I count again at the end of the row because, like I said, if you get your counting wrong, you have totally defeated the purpose of gridding in the first place. And it's not hard. It is a little time consuming, but it is not hard, and it is absolutely worth it. I do not count, I count the 10 stitches between rows over and over and over. As far as how long I am making these stitches, I do not count at all. It is, I eyeball it, and it is what it is because it does not matter. I know there are other cross stitchers who very carefully count their stitches so they have neat little crosses at where the grid lines intersect. And that is gorgeous, and it looks great in their pictures, and I envy them their patience because I do not have the patience for that. So I'm going to continue making lines until I have my 6 lines from the center, and I am going to double count my chart, assuming that there should be 6 lines on the other side of that center point, but I will count again to make sure. I count and recount. And then I will do the same thing going perpendicular in the other direction. And now I'm going to hop to a different project because I can do that. So on this one I have done I've done from the center line up and from the center line across, and that is usually the point where I give myself a break and allow myself to start stitching. I start in the corner, and again I have to show you just a tiny bit of the chart for this to make sense. So this is my intersection where that J is between the 2 grid lines. Over here on my piece that I'm stitching, I found the intersection between the 2 grid lines, and that is where I started stitching. So I'm not quite stitching in the corner. I am stitching where those 2 corner lines match up, which on this particular project puts me 3 stitches in and I think 5 stitches down. Some projects are in a multiple of 10 and you will be right at the edge, but I'm not. And the next thing that people ask me about is how I pull the threads when a project is done. So I am going to pull out All Is Calm, and I have some threads here I don't need anymore, so I can show you on one of those. And bear with me because I'm doing this one-handed and this is ridiculous. I find the end of the thread and snip it, and the end of the other thread and snip it, and then give me just a second. So the bigger your full coverage project is, the harder it is to get those threads to pull neatly out. I just broke 3 of them. But that is the thing that they warn you not to use sewing thread because it can break. Guess what? You can't see the thread that broke. It is buried under the stitches. So I'm not going to lose sleep over that. I found another project where I broke the thread, went over it with a fine-tooth comb. That is the only spot that I can find where I can see that my thread has broken. There are probably more threads in here, but honestly I can't find them. And if I'm sitting here looking with a magnifying glass and I can't find them, I'm not worried about them. So that is how I grid my fabric. I hope that it answered your questions. And thank you for watching. I'm Michelle with Michelle's Romantic Tangle, and I'll be back with more videos soon.